It's always good to have a reason to talk about Naughty Dog and The Last of Us, and to say this sequel divided its audience is not an understatement, it being the modern day equivalent of the Metal Gear Solid 2 bait and switch of the early 2000s on the PS2. This is not the only similarity these two stunning games share. I myself love the game, faultless it certainly was not, but nothing truly is or indeed should even be. No matter where your perspective falls though, none can argue this sheer technical achievement, effort and attention to detail the team at Naughty Dog delivered yet again. This is indeed why I was one of a surprisingly small group it seems that placed this in my #1 tech and graphics of 2020. I mean, look at these sections running on a PS4 and tell me you are not impressed. Those cinematics, that quality, all in real time and seamless. All with a 7200 RPM drive and a 2011 spec GPU. But with the constant stride onto the next big thing, the PS5 has moved the game on again, and this is one of a small number of PS4 exclusives that had not yet seen any kind of PS5 upgrade. Until today. The update follows the trend of all others so far on PlayStation 5 and falls in line with those enhanced backwards compatibility patches I talked about in depth before the PS5 and Series X even launched. Check that video out below or on screen to learn more. But these are a small, almost config level change to the game's initialization and run state to enable the doubling of that refresh rate, just like Days Gone, Ratchet & Clank, Ghost of Tsushima and God of War to name a few. This is really all the update adds, with a new menu option allowing you to revert to the cinematic 30 FPS if you wish, all wrapped up in a small 300 megabyte download. The option is likely via a VSync spoof or such to enable the engine to flip a new frame every 16 milliseconds rather than 33, which obviously means we now get an even smoother and more impressive update as a result. And this includes input latency, which now goes from a high of 170 milliseconds in 30 FPS on the PS4 and the Pro, right down to just around 77 milliseconds at its best point. Obviously depending on the action, camera movement, shooting, animation, all of those things can be much heavier. Remember, this is a very async engine in terms of the CPU and GPU parallelization, so there's a lot of these things that will change. But overall, it's a nice improvement to input latency on top of that refresh rate. Now, being such an eye-wateringly gorgeous game already, from its weighted and pivot-designed animation, wide soundscape and intense sound design, physics-based movement and animation, physically-based shading materials, deformation and dismemberment system, that excellent GI lighting system offering soft contact shadows via proxy capsules, some nice radiosity and bounce, SSR reflection, and again that radiosity, as I mentioned, emitting from that torchlight. And there's so much more you can hear me wax lyrical about as I cover in my technical analysis, my top 10 video, and even that E3 demo to retail comparison I did a while ago. The need or even scope to push this further without a ground up PlayStation 5 remake would be beyond any team in such a short time, and most importantly, it's not required. You see, this 60 FPS patch just allows us to both appreciate and bask in its increased liquid gold fluidity, but also realise just how a 30 FPS target can be a real blessing and more than a worthy cost. Just to clarify for those inevitable comments that I can see being smashed into the keyboard below, as I've said before, 60 is and will always be objectively better than 30. There's no argument there. But a 60 FPS game is not always objectively better or more impressive on a visual or technical perspective than a 30 FPS one. And the same hardware can be made to do so much more in twice the frame rate. Et voila. That said, when you have over 5 times more horsepower than the PS4, then 60 FPS is a good way to use that efficiently and quickly. And for us, we could get to see it quite quickly, and by God it feels great. And it still looks up there with next generation titles already due to those insanely high production values of the game. No derelict office block or dismembered enemy delivers anything but the highest and most consistent quality in the business. From parallax occlusion maps, subsurface scattering, gorgeous self-shadowing hair and beards, a blended vertex decal system on bodies and enemies as you shoot them, and some of the best in-game character models you will ever see. All of this combines to give you one of the most beautiful games throughout your run. All these things combine to deliver sky-high production values and consistency throughout the title. And now that everything runs much faster, this means every swipe, dodge and pixel perfect headshot are that much easier and more predictable to pull off as a result of that hike in performance. This shift in frame rate also means we get twice the temporal resolution from the same spatial one the Pro offered at that 2560 by 1440. That remains, but the console now pushes 2 times the pixel fill rate in the same time, and also matches the majority of screen refresh rates, offering a cleaner, faster, more consistent image, reducing ghosting artifacts alongside that visible judder. Being a 60 FPS game makes it all feel more impressive, as you can truly appreciate how much the PS5 is working here, and it's almost certainly only using a very basic fallback BC profile. This is nothing more than a refresh update. Like I say, everything else is running concurrently, and you can see this sometimes in the game with some glitching out of the animation and physics on the hair and people's arms. Because of that hike, some of the logic can break down, so occasionally you can see slightly more issues like this, such as pressing the X or triangle button can be delayed or not respond quite as often, and again likely down to that logic boost. Now, the ability to utilise the new GPU, CPU and core memory subsystem and that SSD the PS5 is packing is only truly possible with those new SDKs and APIs needed for a more involved recompile using those, or a true remake, which I discuss in more detail in my previously mentioned videos. Now, that said, the limits of the 2.2 GHz GPU, the 448 GB per second memory bandwidth and that 3.5 GHz Zen 2 CPU means you can just brute force the old Pro code to these new heights. And as you can see from my tests, the word target is used in here and in the marketing, but achieved is the more accurate description, with likely a good portion of headroom left to spare. Recall, this is just a native Pro code running on the PS5, nothing more than that, and they've unlocked it, a cheap and easy update to allow it to run at 60 FPS. It's definitely not utilising the PS5 to its potential, and it's likely not even utilising the full speed and core and clock rates of the GPU and CPU, as Sony painted it in their backwards compatibility process. Side by side against the Pro, which was already an almost perfectly performing 30 FPS title, this drops 3 frames. That's it, throughout the entire tested section, and there's more than the 5 minutes you can see here. I tested around 15 to 20 minutes. It's absolutely rock solid. So don't worry about it. If you want to dive back into this, it's definitely worth it, and it feels and looks so much cleaner and smoother. And this can have a change on the visual output, such as motion blur. With it being motion vector based, that is now slower and less velocity. Therefore, the shutter speed has not been changed to compensate, and you get less motion blur on object. And like I say, occasionally you can get some glitching out, which you don't get on the Pro because of that hike in that CPU logic. But as I mentioned at the start, the game does remind me of that classic Metal Gear Solid 2 game due to its groundbreaking technology. It's all driven by core, systemic and emergent gameplay, adaptive and dynamic AI and animation routines both in gameplay and throughout those real-time cinematics. The actual quality of the in-game models here, as you can see on Abby's model, is absolutely superb, and it looks so close to those ones used in the cinematics that I'd say it probably is. The only difference is they ramp up the materials on the skin, and obviously they can hand place a lot of light sources, which always improves the quality of objects. Now, as anyone who purchased that Metal Gear Solid 2 demo back in the day, which if you didn't know actually came with a free Zone of Enders game, yeah, we know how many hours, weeks and potentially months were whittled away playing that tanker mission and manipulating the game's AI hunting, surprising enemies and injury elements alongside the environmental ones. The Last of Us 2 is that, but on a whole new scale. The way combat evolves, adapts and empowers you is always incredible. Tricking enemies, flanking them, being ganged up on, watching them react, wince, suffer or curse, it never gets old, and it really allows you to play a lot of the elements over and over again. This is all bolstered by the verticality of combat, the spaces that give you, the mixture of weapons, hiding in places, or the vast agency you are given to tackle. It really feels more next gen than newer games on many other platforms, any other platform in fact. And actually, it's one of the reasons this video is a day late. It was planning to be up yesterday when I got home when I finished work, but I was just having too much fun. In the end, the day went away from me and I was just pulled back in. I had to actually pull myself away from the game just to tell you all about it. Let's summarise. This patch does not redefine or transform the game. It's always been this incredible piece to begin with. And what it does deliver is a welcome boost, a reason to dive back in again or for the first time, a reason to buy for the first time as it is now on sale and bask in that extra power of the PlayStation 5 for free, and admire, endure and revel in that gorgeous and yet horrifying game at 60 FPS. And with that important thought at the back of our minds, just what in the hell are the dogs cooking up for us when they have served this already on the PlayStation 4? The mind boggles. I'll catch you on the next one.
Watch your backs.